Today was a dark day in the history of the United States Capitol.
You're a conservative. This is the most offensive concept in the world.
This isn't what America is.
Welcome to Inside January 6th, the podcast that dives deep into the details, the facts, and the truth behind that day.
I'm Scott Stevens, alongside Eric Marquette. Each episode, we break down the evidence, expose the full picture, and challenge the narratives surrounding January 6th. The truth is in the details. Let's uncover it.
All right, so let's start with the core narrative, the so-called stolen election claim that Donald Trump pushed relentlessly after the 2020 election. From the very beginning, his story was that widespread voter fraud cost him the presidency. But here's the thing, and this is crucial. More than 60 court cases rejected those claims outright. Not once did the Trump team deliver evidence of fraud substantial enough to flip any state's results.
Right. And those rulings came not just from Democratic-leaning judges, but by judges appointed by Trump himself. I mean, think about that for a second. His own picks wouldn't support these allegations because, as the January 6th committee laid out, there was nothing there. It's like...
Hold on, though. When Trump called the results fraudulent, he wasn't just making accusations. He went further and actively tried to change the narrative through actions.
Yeah, like the call to Brad Raffensperger.
Exactly, Scott. In that infamous phone call to Georgia's Secretary of State, he flat out asked him to find 11,780 votes. That's one more than the margin by which he lost the state. Words matter here. That's not him asking for a recount or an audit. It's him demanding election results be altered. It's brazen interference with democracy.
And think about how terrifying that is. If the top election official in Georgia wasn't solid in his principles, what would have happened? And I got to say, it's not like Brad Raffensperger didn't feel the weight. The investigations into that phone call, they showed just how unprecedented this was. Trump really crossed a line there.
And it wasn't just voters and state officials under pressure. Let's talk about the ripple effect of this misinformation campaign. We see this clearest in the testimonies of some rioters who stormed the Capitol. People like Garrett Miller outright said they believed they were following orders from Trump when they went to the Capitol. One man even called it his civic responsibility.
Yeah, and let's not sugarcoat it. These were individuals committing crimes, most of them violent crimes. But listening to their remorseful statements later, you realize how deeply trapped they were in this alternate reality Trump created. Guys saying stuff like, "I'm ashamed for betraying my country," and calling their actions a mistake driven by words they took literally. It's painful, honestly.
It's a clear example, isn't it? The committee's findings really lay out how Trump weaponized his own supporters by feeding them a narrative of stolen democracy. People who believed they were fighting for justice, only to realize later how manipulated they'd been.
And manipulated by a guy who wouldn't even defend his own lies in court, Eric. That's the part that just fries me. He knew his claims were bogus and couldn't prove them. Yet, outside courtrooms, he kept shouting fraud, rallying loyalists into dangerous action. Look, one officer almost died, another had a stroke.
It absolutely goes beyond rhetoric.
Exactly. And what's worse, stories like Raffensperger's are just one piece of this larger puzzle we'll unpack in this episode.
Scott, as we piece together this larger puzzle, we can't ignore the individuals who helped craft or legitimize Trump's baseless claims. One name that stands out is John Eastman. His infamous memo? It essentially outlined how Vice President Mike Pence might stop the certification of Joe Biden's victory. That memo has been likened to a coup blueprint by several analysts.
Yeah, and let's face it, Eric, it's one thing to hear this nonsense in the media or social posts, but an actual lawyer drafting a legal strategy for undermining the Constitution, that's a whole other level. This wasn't just rhetoric. It laid groundwork for Trump's pressure campaign against Pence.
Exactly. And think about it. Eastman didn't stop there. He was actively advocating for fake electors to be used to overturn results in key states like Georgia. The January 6th committee rightly filed criminal referrals for him. He's now dealing with some serious legal repercussions.
And he should be, no question about it. You know what gets me? The way these Legal professionals, people like John Eastman, Jenna Ellis, and Jeff Clark, abused their roles to fuel Trump's conspiracy theories. Ellis, for instance, admitted in court that her claims about a stolen election weren't true. That censure she got, justified.
And let's not forget Jeff Clark. This was someone within the Department of Justice, Scott, DOJ leadership, pushing baseless theories about hacked voting machines and trying to get the department involved in Trump's attempts to overturn the election. When you're using your position to back dubious claims, it's not just unethical, it's dangerous.
Right, and the thing about Clark, he wasn't some fringe guy on the internet. He was ready to push Attorney General Rosen out of his position just to have the DOJ say the election was suspect. He pleaded the fifth over 100 times in his deposition. Eric, that's not just a red flag. That's a scream for accountability.
It speaks volumes about the integrity, or lack thereof, in parts of Trump's inner circle. Their actions made waves not only in politics, but in the legal profession as well. Giuliani's disbarment, Ellis's censure, Eastman facing trials, it all highlights a kind of recklessness that the legal community is now grappling with. They've made it clear, this can't be tolerated.
You know what sticks with me, Eric? These lawyers took oaths to uphold the law, to defend the Constitution, and instead they threw that out the window to serve one man's obsession with power. It's a complete betrayal of their professions and public trust.
Absolutely, and it goes beyond just disbarments and censures. What they did, it shook the foundation of public confidence in the legal system. These cases are now setting precedents, showing that there are real consequences for undermining democracy in this way.
And here's the kicker. That ripple effect didn't stop with them. Trump's inner circle created this ecosystem of lies, and it's the rest of us who've had to live with the fallout. From the courts to Congress, and ultimately the Capitol itself, their actions were a thread in the tapestry of that tragic day.
Exactly, Scott. But this thread runs even deeper. What stands out in the January 6th report is how all of these factors eventually fed back into Trump's rhetoric and the way he drove his loyal followers. Next, we need to dive into the pivotal moments where Trump directly coerced officials like Pence and turned up the pressure on the Justice Department. Scott, as we shift to those pivotal moments involving Trump's direct pressure on key figures like Vice President Pence, we're faced with an even broader question. What comes next? The January 6th committee didn't just map out wrongdoing. Their actions aimed to ensure accountability. Trump's rhetoric and actions weren't merely personal. They struck at the very core of our democratic system.
Yeah, Eric, the fact that Pence didn't cave to that pressure is huge. You've got Trump, the sitting president at the time, openly pushing Pence to overturn the election during a joint session of Congress. And Pence, knowing that wasn't constitutional, stood firm. It's one of those rare moments where doing the right thing, even under immense pressure, matters more than anything else.
And yet, the committee's findings revealed how dangerously close we came. Trump's refusal to accept the lawful outcome cascaded into threats, not just to Pence, but also to the Justice Department. When leaders like Deputy Attorney General Donahue were being pressured to declare the election results illegitimate, they too held the line. But imagine if they hadn't, Scott.
I don't even want to imagine that. What struck me most, though, were the stories of people like Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, the Georgia election workers who were relentlessly targeted. These women, just honest, everyday workers doing their jobs, ended up with their lives completely turned upside down because of a lie, a deliberate, calculated lie.
Absolutely. Their testimony was both heartbreaking and inspiring. They shared how Trump and his allies pointed the finger at them in baseless claims of fraud. And the impact? Death threats, harassment, even being forced to hide for their own safety. Yet, they still found the courage to speak out.
That's bravery right there, Eric. These aren't politicians or public figures. They didn't sign up for this. And hearing Ruby Freeman say that she felt defenseless broke something in me. But it also made me realize just how critical it is to defend people like them. They're the bedrock of our elections.
And that's why their stories matter so much. They remind us of the human cost of political manipulation. But it's not just about individuals. It's about the precedent we set as a society. Accountability is crucial here. Not just for Trump, but for anyone who works to undermine democratic principles.
Exactly. If we don't hold people accountable, what's stopping this from happening again? You have to send a clear message that democracy isn't to be toyed with. And frankly, the trials, the disbarments, the committee's recommendations, they're a start. But it's up to all of us to stay vigilant.
Well said, Scott. And looking forward, these cases and investigations aren't just short-term news. They're shaping how we protect democracy for generations to come. It's about strengthening trust in institutions, in elections, and in the people who uphold them.
Right. And it's also about remembering that leadership means accountability, whether it's a president, a justice official, or just someone working the polls. Doing the right thing matters. And I think more than anything, that's what we need to take from this.
Absolutely. On that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us in this journey through one of the most critical moments in modern American history. Scott, it's been eye-opening, as always.
Same here, Eric. And folks, remember, democracy takes work. Let's keep doing it.